Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. In this game we're playing Starmada versus vanilla Nomads in a custom scenario called Sensor Field. Let's look at lists first, then talk about the scenario. So this is my testbed slash first attempt at a Starmada list. If you watched my hot takes on the Army update, you'll know I was pretty keen actually on the changes that they've made to Starmada. And the purpose of this list is to kind of test everything that I thought was interesting and wanted to test. So I have almost everything that I want from Starmada here. I just don't necessarily have as much of it as I want. And you'll see what I mean as I get through things. So firstly we have the Epsilon Beta Trooper link team. So we've got an Epsilon, a Beta Trooper Doctor, and a Secu Droid. The Epsilon has a multi-sniper rifle rather than a HMG, just because I think for general purpose, right? General purpose, I would take the HMG if it was a total vacuum. Except that in the context of the game, the meta, whatever, I really value having access to a tag solution. And there are some other weapons in this list that could potentially put a tag down if need be, but having smoke shooting, mimetism, armor piercing, or double action rounds, it just means that in a pinch I can really force pretty much any tag in the game, including the avatar, to be wary of keeping its head out. And I think that's going to be very, very useful because the list only has so much visibility control. Otherwise, on paper, I love this as a Harry's team. It's not cheap, but all of the pieces are basically good, and the Secu Droid really rounds out the list. I've run an adhesive launcher Secu Droid in this version of the list, but I think I will actually change that to an acrylite cannon based on how I ended up positioning the thing. We then have a Roadbot and Oko duo. The Roadbot has the Marksman Rifle Light Shotgun. If you don't need a specialist, that is my preferred Roadbot profile. There is a Red Fury, and it is very serviceable, but it's the shotguns that I think are probably the most important thing on this profile. The Red Fury is something that you take if you are planning to force multiply the Roadbot, so if you want to give it marksmanship, or a REM driver in 012, I think you probably splash for the more expensive higher burst weapon. But in this case, really, the marksman rifle is a nice backup weapon. What this is about is close assault with the shotguns on that tremendously fast profile. Four of the remaining troops in this combat group are really just sort of like essentials that I am choosing to make use of. So I've taken a Raven Eye Lieutenant, and I've taken a Raven Eye as a decoy. You can have two of them in Starmada. They are just nice, good profiles. They're forward observers, they are mine layers with EM mines and EMRATs. They are 12 points, but in terms of being an upgrade over your classic line trooper, I am really very willing to pay 0 SWC and 2 points to put an EM mine in my deployment zone twice. So we have those, and since we have two Raven Eyes, I may as well make something of the fact that I can link. So we have the very cheap, Kappa Hacker submachine gun, and then a Psychop with multi-spectral visor level 1, mimetism, and multi-marksman rifle. Now this Psychop could be, I've got the SWC to make this Psychop something like a Kappa heavy machine gun, which would give me longer ranged firepower, but the Psychop is much, much better at winning face-to-face rolls, and again, I want that ammunition that might threaten a tag or a heavier target, or double action in ARO. The Psychop is also just randomly another specialist. This list is swimming in specialists, although none of them are good at the scenario. And that is kind of like a nice thing about 012 generally, is that you have to kill almost all of this list in order to stop me from having access to specialists. We then have a missile bot. Now, I don't think 012 needs a missile bot, but I have... The reason why I included the Millicent is actually not because I intend to hack things with this WIP 13 hacker. It's because I have a forward observer Oko remote with marksmanship and tack awareness in both of my combat groups. And because I have those, I can randomly forward observe things offensively from time to time. It also, it does liven up the fact I'm pushing these repeaters forward. It opens up Spotlight as an ARO, blah, blah, blah. It's just nice to have, but the plan is very rarely going to be to actually missile things. In Group 2, we have two Sarkos, one Mine Layer and one Forward Observer with Wild Parrot. Both of these are potentially very cool profiles with pretty appealing costs. 23 points and 20 points is sort of certainly affordable for these. And the main reason, the more I look at this faction, the more I look at what Sarkos contribute, I play against Nomads a lot, and if you look at the rest of this list, hackable, 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 technically not hackable, hackable, like, I do not want to push through Masai Morans with this if I don't have to. Having pieces with climbing plus, templates, whatever, stuff that can go in after Morans, Even if it's a mediocre trade, very worthwhile. We then have a Lambda engineer and a Yudbot because there are plenty of repairable things, but also this list is designed to be able to do something like highly classified if need be, and then a Sol Varangian. The Varangian's primary job is literally just to give smoke for the Epsilon because I want to be able to smoke shoot. So this is basically everything that I want to try out in Starmada. Things that are missing, a second Roadbot to duo with a second Oko, and I basically had to cut that in order to fit the mine layers. I would also, so the Sarkos. Robot to duo with Oko. I would also, if I could get it, really like a whatever they're called, Hacking Device Plus, because I would like access to white noise. Although right now most of my guns are MSV 1 or 2, which is why I've been reasonably comfortable getting rid of it. I would also like a killer hacker if I could, and then I would finally like a Zeta. That's not happening with what's in the list presently. What I found basically is to fit a Zeta, you have to cut this fire team. You have to cut the Epsilon, Doctor, and Secu Droid. And you can, and then you get a Zeta, but the list radically changes at that point. So this is effectively like a first draft slash test bed, but I was pretty confident in its capabilities. Playing against it would be a similar kind of test bed Nomad list. So this is my opponent's Nomads list. I am not actually sure about the groups entirely. This is reconstituted, but it's basically heavily making use of Mother Wabara with a Zondbot as a kind of like combat doctor, so it's taking things for her to heal. In particular, it's got Nauf hanging around here somewhere, and Kusanagi. So that's like mimetism, good gunfighting kind of situation. And Nauf especially really benefits from having a doctor that is very, very good at passing doctor rolls. Mother Agatha is whip 17 on her doctor rolls essentially, which means the fact that Nauf has no cube is not a death sentence. So you can actually take Nauf and expect to heal him with her while she does things like move up the table, maybe even heal herself. Kusanagi, I think, is still very expensive at 41 points. She is kind of a fire team in a can, right? She's a specialist. She's got good, very good gunfighting. She doesn't have AP, but she does have a zapper if she needs to close in on an enemy tag. You know, risk the flamethrower for the shutdown. Um, I'm personally, and the reason why I am worried about the 41 points is that you need a plan for getting her up the field. She is a 4/4 move trooper that you just have to spend one or two or three orders just moving forward. She's very inefficient in that respect in, your 15 trooper list. Mother Agatha doesn't fall by the same problem because Mother Agatha is going to move and doctor someone, move and doctor someone. Oh, look, coincidentally, I'm 8 inches forward. That will happen with her. Whereas with Kusanagi, you just if you're moving forward, you're moving forward. You've got to spend the orders to do it. It's less, the opportunity cost is relatively higher. Otherwise, we've got Zoe and Pywell, who are fantastic. Moderator with Decoy, who is fantastic. Basically, they remain kind of the best lieutenant profile. You could have tried to force the demonologist in this list, but it would have been very foolish because there's no NCO. And realistically, the demonologist is not a particularly good profile generally. It's very expensive for basically kitsch like things. It has a Libertos. No mind because like SWC is very heavy in this list. Branda Castro, who is not necessarily an auto include, but very, very, very close to one in basically every Nomad list. A couple of Morlocks, a single Moran, a Vertigo Zond, an Interventor, and a Digger. So this is basically just a big pile of good stuff. The biggest challenge the list is going to face is the potential of being locked in its deployment zone. It's got some guns to shoot its way out, but it's not going all in on asymmetric warfare, nothing but missiles, nothing but close assault. It's trying to do both things at once. And if Nauf falters, the void that's going to be left in his absence is going to be significant. And we'll kind of see that in the game. Let's talk first about the scenario. So the scenario is called Sensor Field, and it's won by Rob from Canberra. And it's not a particularly complicated scenario, but it does require you thinking about it. And in particular, you have to actually mentally internalize the ways in which it is different from scenarios that you might be used to. Because it is really, as far as I can tell, it's very much meant to be supremacy with a twist. Supremacy, but you score in a different way. But if you don't pay attention to exactly how those differences manifest, it's very easy to get yourself hung up on the ways that it's different rather than the ways that it's the same. So, like Supremacy, there are 4 quadrants, except that these quadrants, there is a little bit of a gap, right? So your deployment zone will be 12 inches forward. There's a dead zone, of 4 inches between your deployment and the first quadrant. So the quadrants are quite narrow, but otherwise they are quadrants just like in Supremacy. You don't score them by having more points in them. You score them by having more sensors deployed, and you deploy a sensor using a short skill that any specialist can perform, but which engineers and chain of command troopers get a bonus on. So you can place a sensor, so you place a sensor there, and once placed, you have a sensor in this zone, and you will have 2 points for having more sensors in zones than your opponent has zones with sensors in them at the end of every round. So it's very, very similar in that respect to how Supremacy plays out, where Supremacy, you're trying to have more points in zones. So maybe you will have 3, your opponent has 1. Maybe you will have 2, your opponent will have 2, right? You score points by having more zones with your scanners in them. So like if I have 3 at the end of a round and my opponent has only gotten 2, then I will be able to score that round. In addition, there are 2 classifieds, and you get 1 point per enemy zone per game if you end a turn, not round, with a scanner in each. So that's probably the part that throws people the most, because end of turn scoring is really rare in Infinity. It's not actually complicated to think about. I need to get a scanner into one of these zones, this zone and this zone, and make sure that my opponent has no scanners in those zones, which you do by shooting enemy scanners. They're just deployable equipment. And I will score 1 point for each of those zones if I just end a turn with a scanner in it and none of my opponents. So that means that you have 1 point for each of your opponent's zones, 1 point for each of 2 classifieds, and then 2 points at the end of each round for having more zones with scanners in them than your opponent has zones with scanners in them. In practice, how this plays is a real contest of materiel, because the scanners, although they can never be placed in cover or on buildings, and they can never benefit from cover, right? Those rules, like they can never benefit from cover, is how you want to internalize that. They always have to be on ground level, can't be touching terrain. They have 2 wounds, and it's very easy to accidentally fail to destroy one if you're going after them with like a combi rifle or a chain rifle. It can take time to do so. What I have found in scenarios that use scanners is you want to focus first on deploying your own, and then going after your opponents in kind of like a judicious way. Go after the ones that it's harder for your opponent to replace. So like if they had an engineer in this quadrant that moved forward and placed a scanner, and then they did the same over here, but you killed this engineer, this is the better scanner to attack, because if you destroy it, it's harder for your opponent to replace because they have to bring an engineer all the way around here, or a specialist. So it's kind of an interesting scenario to play. This was the first time that I have played it. It all made pretty much total sense, but I did have the advantage of having played a scenario that used the sensor mechanic before. And what I learned from that basically is that first turn favored. What you really want to do in scenarios with sensors that Rob Wright has written is that you want to go first, slam your sensors down in the most awkward positions possible, and then use whatever orders you have left just to do some damage to your opponent. Now, I know from design that Rob is going for, he wants to create scenarios where the first player is incentivized not to just spend their entire order pool alpha striking. He wants to make a scenario where if you're the first player, you can genuinely get some runs on the board, but you have to do so kind of at the expense of making a devastating attack. Now, in this particular case, I was able to just about pull both off, and it meant that the game was effectively won on the first turn, because the damage that I did was sort of irrecoverable. Because I was able to both do damage and get a scenario lead, but we will talk about that. But yeah, it is an interesting scenario. I think it favors going first, but I think it favors going first in a way where it is the scenario, right? Getting ahead on scenario is what favors going first, not just dealing an alpha strike. And that makes it interesting, unique, and worth playing. So let's look at deployment. So we make the whip roll. We're both rolling whip 13 lieutenants. I have my Raven Eye, and my opponent has his moderator, and I win the roll. And I actually sort of like spend a couple of minutes pointlessly thinking, do I want to go first or not? Because it was like, this scenario, is it like the other one with sensors? Do I want to do that? And then I stopped and said, oh, hang on, you have Branda Castro, I'm going first. Which was absolutely the right play in every conceivable universe. Brenda Castro is just one of those pieces, like Andromeda before she got nerfed, etc. You just don't go second against. The risk of the damage that he can do is just too high. I do think that Starmada is one of the factions that will have a better chance holding him off than other factions, because Starmada deployment zone defense is oriented around non-lethal but mobility kill defenses. So you have adhesive launchers and acrylat cannons and electromagnetic weapons. Now, God help you if a bear runs over you. I think that's probably one of the biggest weaknesses of Starmada is just if bear pods attack. But against stuff like Branda Castro, where it's 2 wounds that you really don't want to have to, like, you can't stop Branda Castro with a shock mine. Maybe being able to stop him with adhesive launchers and EM mines is possible, which I think is nice. That's kind of like an interesting tension in the faction. But in this case, having none of that, I'm just going first. So I spend a command token. My list is 15 regular troopers, so I've got command tokens to blow for days. I spend a command token to reserve 2 units, which are going to be the Oko in Group 1 and the Roadbot. Otherwise, in terms of my deployment, we've got the one of the Raven Eyes back here with his mine here, another Raven Eye back somewhere like here with his mine there, right on the deployment zone edge. This is the Psychop, so we've got the Psychop, the Hacker, and the Raven Eye in this team here. The Mechanic is here with her, anticipating that maybe the Roadbot will come down there. We have the Group 2 Oko over here. The Missile Bot is on the basically the table edge. Pretend that it is on the exact edge of the deployment zone watching for drop troops, like deployment zone infiltrators. But in practice, I was afraid to put it right up against the table edge, but this is sort of realistically where it is deployed. We have, and otherwise we have the Beta Trooper team. So the Epsilon is deployed here, the Beta Trooper is on ground level, and then the Secu Droid is here. Secu Droid, again, I have it with an adhesive launcher in this game. This is the first position where I've put it, where it has like a long line down here, and I kind of wish I had just given it an acrylat cannon, so I'll be making that change in future games. The Varangian is here, anticipating moving in this direction with Impetuous and dropping smoke for the Epsilon. Otherwise, across the midfield, we have the Wild Parrot Forward Observer Sarco here, and then a Mine Layer and a Mine Sarco over here. So this is the Mine, and this is the Mine Layer. It's kind of like less stuff generally. There's no peripherals, like there's one peripheral obviously, but it's not trying to cheat in anything. It's got a reasonable wound count. It all just feels kind of very generally okay, but like all 15 troopers in the entire list do something interesting and useful. There is no cheerleaders at all in that list, and I like that. And I like that about list construction, and Starmada can do that, so that's good. In terms of how my opponent has and will deployed, there is probably the biggest. So he picked this deployment side, and he very quickly kind of realized that deploying on this table is really hard. We have what I would call the level 1, level 2 problem, right, where the rooftop is a parking lot. Really none of this rooftop space is safe to deploy on. Like, look at this roof here, for example. There is no cover. You will be seen from literally every other rooftop, and you will die. This is outside the deployment zone, so his actual space to deploy is way, way more limited than it looks when he deployed there. There's some space back here, there's a little bit of space back here, there's a bit of space back here and here. This is the table edge there, but it's kind of rough, and he's struggling a bit. What ends up happening is that probably way too much stuff gets placed here. So we're going to end up with Nauf and Wabara's Helper Bot, and a Morlock, and a Moderator, and an Interventor back here. And if this formation concerns you, it should. Otherwise, we have Zoe hanging out back here, the Missile Bot here, a Moderator here. The Digger is going to deploy there. And Pywell has come he's as far forward as he can be, but he's in a bad spot too. He is just kind of leaned out there, where he can be seen from, say, this rooftop, which might also concern you. So this is a rough deployment. This is very difficult deployment. Kusanagi is reasonably safe. She's hanging out back here. And the Moran is in a good spot. The Moran has deployed down here. But one Moran in this particular case is not covering enough space. It's a big area, but it's not quite enough. And one of the things that this list is missing is it's got Pywell, providing kind of like that area. And that's basically all of the repeaters. There's no Robin Hook. There's no second Moran. The Interventor is over here and Zoe is here. So we've got like sort of some more kind of space like that. But this is not an impermeable hacking network. And that's going to be really important on the first turn, because one of the things that this sort of Starmada list doesn't like, I mentioned, right, it's got the Sarcos in it to push through hacking networks, but I haven't been presented with enough of a hacking network to stop me. And my opponent recognizes that on the first. He recognizes that during deployment, and he triages. And he triages, I think, really well. It's just, it's not going to be enough. So his reserve drop is Brand Castro here, in response to me deploying my Roadbot here and my second Oko here. So this is a duo, Haris. This duo he recognizes is an existential threat, because the Roadbot, if left unopposed, is just going to go there and lay down a shotgun template on all of the models that are clustered here. So he decides he has to stop it, and he deploys Brand de Castro. Now, Brand is not the best tool for this job, but he's the only tool that he's got. He takes 2 orders away from the Roadbots team, but I'm gonna be left with the 9 orders in Combat Group 1, 6 in Combat Group 2, and we crack on. So the very first, the Varangian moves forward as planned and throws smoke, and then the Oko duo activates over here. Tactical awareness, first short skill, discover Bran. Bran just salutes the flag and fires a shotgun template at the Oko, and the Oko puts 3 shots against him with the combi rifle in the open. He takes 1 wound, and the Oko gets knocked unconscious, and then the Roadbot dismounts, cat form, up and around there, moves to there. Another shotgun into the Roadbot, 3 shots back at Brand de Castro. The Roadbot takes a wound. Brand de Castro goes all the way to dead because he's already in no wounding cap. So what has Brand accomplished? Well, to be honest, he's taken 2 orders, and he's killed a 16-point model and wounded a 26-point model. It's not the worst trade in materiel. It's just not going to be enough. I have to make a really big call here as to what my second combat group is going to do, and I stall out from it while I'm thinking about it. So basically, to give myself time but keep the game moving, we already have smoke here. The Epsilon team activates. The Epsilon climbing plus is up to there and shoots Pywell to death. This is something that you really don't want to have happen, but again, the deployment zone that my opponent picked was rough. Smoke shooting through here is just going to be egregious. Pywell has no defense against this. It's going to be more than 24 inches, so the double action rounds put him down. He does go gamely for a dodge in this direction, but it's not successful. So Pywell down, repeater network continues to diminish. At this point, mostly as like a bit of an experiment, I make the call that what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that engineer in Combat Group 2. I eyeball that it'll take me 3 orders, and it does. So the helper bot moves and then moves. Then it swings past the Oko here and heals it from no wounding cap. And then it moves in and it heals the copper bot over here. So in 3 orders, I've recovered 2 wounds. I could have been using them to do the objective, but I decide to do this instead. Then I spend a command token and reform this duo, and we roll out. We're able to slide past the Moran by following this alleyway, and although it takes a couple of orders, these are move, place sensor, move, place sensor. We get 1 sensor down there, and we get 1 sensor down there, and we have basically exactly enough orders for the cat to go into cat form, the Roadbot to go into, not cat form, but you know what I mean, into motorcycle form, climb up the wall, up and around there, and put that shotgun down. And triple shotgun templates, he fires back, tries to put me down. And what actually happens is that the helper bot from Mother Wabara dodges into close combat, but the shotguns put down the moderator, the Morlock, and Nauf. I am engaged now, but that's super, super bad. So I've killed Pywell, I've killed 4 models on the first turn, and I have kind of like enough orders, just enough orders left in Combat Group 2 that this Oko here, with the 3 orders that it has, because everything else in Group 2 has been spent doing the healing. It uses its tactical awareness order to move around to here, moves to here, tries to place a thing, fails, moves to here, and places a sensor. So first turn is over. I've got 3 sensors down, each in different zones, and I've put absolute hell into my opponent. Now, he can recover, but it's going to be extremely challenging. Mostly because the orders that it will take to contest the scenario, right? Destroying this objective, this sensor, and this sensor is going to be functionally impossible for him. And because of that, scoring scenario this turn is going to be functionally impossible. He is not going to be able to get 3 sensors down in different zones himself and also do any damage to me. What he does do, though, is good. It's like good play, it just won't be enough. So the Interventor moves around to here, remembering that the Roadbot is in combat, and the Roadbot succeeds its dodge, and the Interventor immobilizes it. Then I've dodged out of combat, the Interventor just moves around to here, I try and reset, double shotguns, and kills me. So a nice clean kill with the Interventor shotgun. And then the interventor uses basically the last two orders in its group. It's going to hide down here, and it's going to put white noise up basically here. At this point, Kusanagi moves forward. She gets up onto this, and she takes some gunfights, and she puts the Epsilon to unconscious. Shooting through white noise, I'm shooting back. I ignore her mimetism because my MSV2, but I'm still at -6. Basically, I'm on 10s, she's on 11s, she's 4 dice, I'm 2. It's not the worst face-to-face in the world because she does have to come out of cover to see me. Not the worst face-to-face in the world, but she is favored, and the Epsilon goes down. But between that and the Roadbot, those are the only kills that he will score this turn. The rest of the orders are spent pulling Kusanagi back to here and leaving behind a sensor, and one sensor is kind of not enough. So at this point, I score 2 at the end of the scenario, plus end of the round, plus 1 at the end of the last turn for having scanned this zone. So I'm up 3-0, and then turn 2 begins. So this is the beginning of turn 2 picture. We can see that the Oko that moved up with the Roadbot is hanging out down here, and the Epsilon is unconscious on this rooftop, and the Varangian has moved forward. This is, for practical purposes, going to be the last turn in the game. The Beta Trooper moves up, heals the Epsilon, and I reform the link. And then pretty much all that I have to do this turn is this link climbs down over to there, moves up this direction, shoots and kills the digger. Yeah, it's here on the way up the table. Places another sensor. So we've got one there, one there, one there, and one there. And like realistically, that's the game. We actually kind of call it at that point because there's just like I've still got orders left, but I'm down only a single model because I've been bringing things back. Kusanagi is kind of pinned down where she is. I do use the Sarko finally, and this is what is going to be the killing blow, is that this Sarko here moves up this way, places a wild parrot, comes up and over the top, and shoots the interventor. She fires a template, kills me, I fire my submachine gun, kill her, and that's the game, effectively. I place a decharge along the way to do one of my 2 classifieds. We can, right, we could, in a tournament, we would play this all the way to turn 3, we would play it to its bloody conclusion, but with sensors here, 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 and here, none of them are going to die. Like, he might maybe kill one of them, but with this sensor destroyed, I've scored this quadrant, so I'm on. I've got both points for scoring the far enemy quadrants with sensors. I'm going to score. I'm going to keep scoring every round more quadrants, and I've just done one classified, and the other is pretty easy. I just at some point have to coup de grace something. So we do call the game there. I think this was a real demonstration in how. This scenario I like, but I think that if you can do any damage on the first turn, it is very first player favored. But what that means is that to make Sensor Field into a game, you must present arrows. You must present like either you have to go really good midfield, kind of like Robin Hook, Masai Moran, fight through this hacking shit. It's going to be miserable for you. You have to either do really good asymmetric defense that makes pushing across the halfway line really, really hoary, because remember, our objective is to both place all of our scanners and kill stuff. You either have to do that, or you have to just put up defensive pieces that are very, very challenging and order intensive to dislodge. And that might mean like just a tag that you make your opponent do 2 wounds to. But you must defend effectively in Sensor Field as the second player. If you can do that, if you can come through your first turn basically okay, it is a very playable from player 2 situation, because your opponent, if they've done a bunch of damage, if you just defend okay, if they do a bunch of damage to you, they haven't placed sensors, and if they've placed sensors, they haven't done a bunch of damage to you. But you have to defend in a way that avoids the possibility of them doing both. Now, in terms of thoughts on Starmada, this was a fantastic first test. I got to try out the Epsilon Beta Triad, and it was great. It did exactly what I wanted. It brought the Epsilon back from the death. It had the Secu droid just run around and be a little weebling, annoying person. And I had the Beta Trooper fire shotguns, kill things, place objectives, etc. It was excellent. The Roadbot Oko duo performed exactly according to my desires. The speed on that thing is ridiculous. Like, 1 order, take a fight, 2 orders, like boom. It's so fast. And I think I will probably consider reserve dropping them like this again. You have the command tokens in this list if you're going first. You kind of may as well. Would I want a second one of those linked teams now that I've played it? Probably. They're really, really good. Roadbots are fantastic, and one in the second combat group would allow for another kind of attack like that to be launched. But this list is trying to do a bunch of different things, and I think I'm hedging my bets reasonably well by taking these Sarkos. Because without them, like just imagine there was a Masai Moran up here, and a Masai Moran up here. I've got climbing plus template armed skirmishers. The only thing in Starmada that's going to kill them, like realistically, you either get hacked to shit or you climb up and you put the damn things down. And it is basically the only way in Starmada I can think of to take those things out. And that is a weakness of the faction. If they're on the highest ground on the table and you can't use your climbing plus to get after them, you're SOL unless you just go in the hard way. That said, the amount of climbing plus in this sectoral was super fun to play with. The fact that this duo was climbing plus, this entire Harry's team was climbing plus, both of the skirmishers were climbing plus, the random copper bot that was running around is climbing plus. It's really nice. And it also lets you look at the table in a way where you don't have to think about all of the different angles, you just think about where you can climb to. That's nice. It's like easy to contemplate. It's very cool. So yeah, this was fun. I am going to play Starmada some more. We've got a league that's in progress. I'm going to play them a little bit for that. It is a genuine question. How do I feel about them versus Vanilla 012? And I don't know. The ability to duo the Roadbot and the Oko is a significant force multiplier, just generally, but in any scenario where having a specialist bolted to your attack piece matters. And that is something that Starmada and O12 do generally. They just have these random specialists everywhere. I would not want to play this list in Firefight because like half of the list is specialists, maybe more. But in a scenario like this, or even like not so much in highly classified as an example because you need specific. You need your doctor and your engineer. You don't need your specialist operatives. But overall, really good first impression. Really good first impression. Like Starmada a lot. We'll see how their defenses hold up, right? The fulcrum point might be I play a game going second, two bears kick my ass and I feel sad, and I might change my mind at that point about whether I like them. But as a first fielding, this was pretty cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.